Okay, now, our first speaker, round of applause, Charles Michael Yim from Cointopia. He's going to be talking about global ICO landscape. A big round of applause, please. Thanks for coming, Charles.
Thank you for having me.
Really great having you here.
Yeah,
so the stage is yours.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Charles Michael Yim, and I am a serial entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. And today I'd like to talk about three things. All things ICOs, primarily current landscape, and then two, best practices, and lastly, a little bit about what my company does, Cointopia. We are essentially an ICO launching platform, and as well as a marketplace, soon to later evolve into an exchange, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So kind of kicking things off. So I thought this would be interesting to share initially. It's amazing to see the amount of growth and tremendous explosion just in the past year and a half in the ICO marketplace. If some of you haven't seen this infographic, it's pretty interesting because as you can see, just 1 year ago, March 28th in 2017, you can see it was just a little under 1 billion ICOs that were funded. And it's just 7 months ago, I stress again, 7 months ago, back in August of last year, you can see it's already moving into the billions. But what's quite more impressive is, if you look at where we are now, we're just a little over $6 billion in funding in the ICO marketplace. Now, if you really just wrap your head around that numerically, number-wise, right, you quantify that, there's nothing in the history of time that can even remotely resemble growth as much as this. Granted, as you can understand now that regulatory is moving into the space, especially from the US and in Asia and soon to be Europe, things will slow down a bit, things will standardize, the chaos will become a little bit more orderly. But nevertheless, I would like to kind of start this off with just kind of wrapping our heads around essentially the amount of funding, the amount of money and cash flow that's moving to the space. So being that we've now done thousands of ICOs, I believe there's close to almost 1,200 ICOs or tokens listed on the various exchanges, you really have to ask yourself the question, what does it take to do an ICO? And more importantly, should you do an ICO? So I put together basically a few talking points in terms of what are the key areas that are best suited for best practices. So a few of the following that I'll briefly cover is product, team, the technology and the white paper, legal and compliance, security, and lastly, marketing public relations, right? So kind of kicking things off, I think the first thing that you should consider is it warranted? Does it make sense for your company to do an ICO? A lot of people are kind of jumping into the space because there's a lot of money, yes, but you really have to ask yourself, is the application of an ICO, tokenizing your business, does it make sense? I always ask myself in terms of my business, right, does it make sense to decentralize the business model, right? Two, is there a warranted application to tokenize a business, whether it's moving in a liquid asset and moving it to a liquid model, a liquid business model, and does it make sense to involve retail investors? If it's a supply chain play, perhaps it's slightly different because it's an internal business model or system, but you got to ask yourself this key question, be honest with yourself, because I feel that there's just so many companies out there that are just tokenizing and doing an ICO just to do an ICO. If it's not warranted, the tokenomics, the system, it will fail. And eventually you'll see a lot of these tokens, these coins in the market. I apologize for the French, if you will, but they're shit coins, and you'll start to see them zero out. And you're starting to see a consolidation in the market whereby a lot of these tokens are actually being delisted on the exchanges as opposed to being listed. So you'll start to see a lot of filtration, you'll start to see a lot of consolidation, and you got to start to kind of ask yourself from the very beginning, is an ICO, does it make sense, is it warranted, and is there an application? So outside of that, you just got to make sure that you have a real product, and that ideally, if you're going to go ahead and ICO now in this time, in this age of the space, you got to really make sure that you actually have a real working product, a minimal viable product, a prototype at least, to go ahead and showcase that you actually have a real product and a real team behind it. So having said that, I would say the standards overall in the marketplace are increasing. What that means is, you can't just put a white paper together and maybe 2 team members, a developer, and yourself, and imagine, and expect to raise $20, $30 million. Those days are gone, right? Those are, basically 12 to 18 months ago. The expectations and the standards now have drastically increased. The expectation now is that you have an MVP, a minimal viable product, you have a working prototype, and you have a real team behind it with relevant experience. So if you're developing a fintech product, if you're developing a messaging product, if you're in the real estate space, that you actually have a relevant team in place that has had some tremendous amount of experience or I would say success in that space to showcase that there is a track record. It's not just a whimsy team that was put together overnight just to go ahead and sell to the market and to the various retail investors. Another thing, going back to the technology and white paper, there's a lot of ICOs that are trying to skip on this, believe it or not, or they just put it over to, put it together over, a 1 to 2 week course of time. I stress this as a thing or an aspect of the business whereby, you need to invest in it. For instance, for Cointopia's white paper, it took us almost 4 months to put together. We actually had a white paper specialist, we had a token strategist, and we basically looked at it from all different purviews. I also circulated it to our board of advisors. We have about 8 experts on our board. And just looking at every single angle that there is, every risk point, and every element of the white paper to understand, does it make sense, is there something that's missing, and to make sure that it's a quality white paper so you know the ins and outs of your business. Here is legal compliance. It's very relevant in the United States, extremely relevant in Asia, and definitely relevant here in Europe. I would say here is that basically the SEC is clamping down in the United States, and being that the US is one of the leading markets, it'll eventually make its way overseas, especially here in Europe. But Asia too. If you look at Japan, for instance, there's tremendous tax implications. If you're looking at Hong Kong and China, there's technically an ICO ban. And Korea, the same with the regulatory. It's kind of tightening up, but soon it'll be loosened up a little bit. But the point is, compliance, regulatory, it's a real thing. Just because there's just been so much dollars that have been basically funneled into this space, regulatory is a big concern. So I think the key, ideally, for all of us is that regulatory does kind of drive order to all this chaos, but it doesn't do it to the extent that it hampers innovation. But SEC right now is stressing compliance, making sure that everyone's doing the right thing, everyone's registering for particular licenses. But here in Europe, it's a little bit more lax, it's a little bit more loose, and hopefully it doesn't get too strict over here. But I'll just brush over that. Lastly, security. 2 things here. You got to make sure that your technology is secure. What I've noticed, though, it's a company that I was advising, B-Token. They suffered what is called a phishing scam. And what that means is it was essentially some hackers that were, I would say, posing as the founders, and they were able to basically siphon over $1 million, $1 to $1.5 million, posing as the founders and from retail investors. Luckily, Jonathan, CEO, and the founders made them whole. They still offered their tokens to those respective investors and made things right. But nevertheless, when you think about security, it's not just the security of your code and your best practices around that area. It could also fundamentally be about hackers and them phishing for emails, your phone numbers, hijacking numerous types of things. So I think it's more so a mentality when you think about security. It's not just about the security itself in terms of the code and technology. Lastly, in terms of marketing public relations, I think this goes hand in hand with compliance. When you're marketing your product or your technology, you have to be very careful about the claims that you make. As you've heard, Google, Twitter, and as well as obviously Facebook that started it are now banning ICO ads, especially in respect to retail investors. It's all in the claims that they make. What that means is some of these ads that are coming out are promising something crazy like 10x or 20x your return. You can't promise that. All you can promise is that you'll work hard and diligent to build your product, that you're working hard to have a successful ICO, and once you tokenize, that you'll work diligently to go ahead and progress your technology and overall the company and the business. But you cannot go as far as making claims about what your technology can do or a multiple of your return, just because that's all hearsay, right? So having said that, you got to make sure that your marketing is on point and is compliant. and that you're actually marketing what is real. It's very easy to fall in the traps of kind of, self-promotion, drinking the Kool-Aid, or, being the over-promotional or over-optimistic founder. I'm sometimes even personally guilty of that, but nevertheless, you just got to make sure you're promoting and you're marketing the right claims. So lastly, basically I'm the founder and CEO of Cointopia. I do think it helps whereby if you do partner up with an ICO platform, it makes a whole lot of sense. It'll ease and streamline the overall process and reduce the friction points for you. And so we're not the only ones out there, but we are the first to market in terms of being the leading global ICO platform. And what that means is three things. We focus on the token sale, we focus on the post-ICO management portion of the solution, and lastly, we provide a marketplace for service providers. So it's interestingly enough, one of our lead clients that we just signed with is Kodak. I think everyone knows of Kodak. They're a global brand. They're now becoming more relevant again. They focused on essentially digital products and merchandising. Now they're actually focusing on digitizing digital rights, if you will. So basically think of photos all over on the internet, and you can utilize the Kodak coin as a currency. I wanted to showcase this client because, one, we're helping them through their token sale. We have an exclusive with them, close to almost over $40 million worth of allocation. But more importantly is after you've actually had a successful token sale, what's equally important or more important is that you have to go ahead and manage your token or your coin table. And you have to understand the performance of your coin. You have to continue to want to drive value to the token as well. And lastly, you want to communicate to your token holders. A lot of these ICOs, they raise, say, 10, 20, 30, 50, $100 million, and the next thing you know, they're very good at the disappearing act. So one thing is very key is similar to traditional venture, you want to remain to be in contact and communicate effectively with your investors, essentially your token holders. You want to manage and understand exactly what's happening with the performance of your tokens, and if there's secondary trades, if there's volume trading through the exchange listings, what does that look like, right? Why is it moving up? Why is it moving down? Or are there things that you can do to impact it, whether it's positive, primarily positive versus the negative? So having said that, we're really proud to bring on Kodak. We have about close to a $2 billion pipeline that's now inbound. We have over 100 service providers that have signed up with us in the United States alone, some international. We want to provide a marketplace basically for service providers that serve specifically ICO companies. So if you need basically a token strategist, if you need a security auditor, a financial firm, a legal firm, if you need an advisory firm in general, you can actually go to Cointopia and basically hunt for one. There's an open bidding system. You can go ahead and select exactly which vendor you want to work with, and after the process, you can go ahead and review 1 to 5 stars how your experience was. So we want to drive transparency to the vendor marketplace. We want to help you with your token launch, find the right accredited investors. We actually have a broker-dealer license in the United States, so we're compliant with the SEC. It allows us to operate worldwide, whether it's here in Istanbul, or whether it's in Asia, or the rest of Europe, or South America, or obviously in the United States. But I stress that equally as important, once you actually conduct and finalize a successful ICO, it's equally as important to go ahead and manage your ICO post-haste. So that's really it. My name is Charles Michael Yim again. I really appreciate the time that you've offered me this morning. If you have any other questions, myself and my fellow colleague Tuğçe, who is here as a Turkish native, is right over there. You can speak to either of us, but you can reach me at cmycointopia.com. My Twitter handle is Charles M. Yim, similar to Instagram. If there's any respective ICOs or accredited investors, happy to chat with either of you. And I'm happy to also forward my slides as well in terms of the best practices. Shoot me an email, and I'll have my assistant go ahead and forward it over. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it very much.